For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is drafting reservists in Russia in a major military buildup in the war in Ukraine. He made the announcement on the backdrop of a military setback last week when Ukraine reclaimed the Kharkiv region. His comments were translated by Al Jazeera.
We are talking of a partial mobilization only. Only people in the military reserve will be drafted. The priority will be on people who served in the armed forces, have military specialization and experience. Those drafted before being sent to the places of service will have mandatory additional training, relying on experience gained during the special military operation.
Putin also warned the West he isn't bluffing over using all the means at his disposal to protect Russia's territory, in what appeared to be a veiled reference to Russia's nuclear capability. The war in Ukraine is taking center stage at the United Nations, where world leaders are gathering. France's President Emmanuel Macron slammed Russia's war. His comments were translated by Al Jazeera.
Au moment où je vous parle,
as I am speaking to you now, there are Russian troops in Ukraine, but as far as I know, there are no Ukrainian troops in Russia. That's a fact, and we all have to recognize that. The longer this war goes on for, the more it threatens peace in Europe and the entire world. It leads to a wider, permanent conflict, where the sovereignty and security of everyone will only depend on power. What we have been witnessing since February 24th is a return to imperialism and colonialism.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky are set to speak today. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also placed a focus on climate change. Eileen Alfandary has more.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged rich nations to tax the windfall profits of the fossil fuel industry to help victims of the climate crisis in poorer nations.
The fossil fuel industry is feasting on hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies and windfall profits, while households' budgets shrink and our planet burns. It's high time to put fossil fuel producers, investors and enablers on notice. Polluters must pay. And today I'm calling on all developed economies to tax the windfall profits of fossil fuel companies.
Oil companies in July reported unprecedented profits of billions of dollars per month. ExxonMobil posted 3-month profits of nearly $18 billion. Chevron, nearly $12 billion. Shell, $11.5 billion. I'm Eileen Alfandary, KPFA Pacifica Radio.
Venezuelan migrants flown to Martha's Vineyard sued Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and his transportation secretary Tuesday for engaging in what their lawsuit calls a fraudulent and discriminatory scheme to relocate them. The lawsuit filed in federal court in Boston alleges they were told they were going to Boston or Washington, which was completely false, and were induced with perks such as $10 McDonald's gift certificates. The executive director of Lawyers for Civil Rights said no human being should be used as a political pawn. Mary Sherman has more.
He should come visit. We have a beautiful shoreline.
President Joe Biden was asked about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' threat to fly migrants to his home state of Delaware. The White House says it is working with local officials to prepare for the potential flight, which comes a week after DeSantis flew 48 migrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard. House Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries slammed DeSantis and the Republican governors of Texas and Arizona, who have transported more than 10,000 migrants to Democratic cities.
They should start behaving like governors and stop behaving like human traffickers. They are putting politics over people in the most egregious way possible.
DeSantis, however, argued sanctuary cities should have to bear the brunt of what he called the Biden administration's open border policies.
Those migrants were being treated horribly by Biden. They were hungry, homeless. They had no opportunity at all. The state of Florida, it was volunteer, offered transport to sanctuary jurisdictions.
I'm Mary Sherman for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
Hurricane Fiona has strengthened into a Category 4 storm after lashing the Turks and Caicos Islands and devastating Puerto Rico. It's forecast to squeeze past Bermuda later this week. The storm is directly blamed for at least 4 deaths in the Caribbean and widespread power outages in Puerto Rico that have left people without running water. A representative of Puerto Rico's governor spoke with Senate Democrats Tuesday at the nation's capital and said it's time Puerto Rico's second-class status ends.
The difference in treatment in healthcare, the lack of funding for Medicaid, Medicare, the fact that Puerto Rico does not receive the SSI, we don't participate in SNAP, It's at this time that show that our most vulnerable population is treated as second-class citizens, and this needs to end. Our citizens deserve the same support and the same quality of life as their brothers and sisters in the mainland.
Parts of Puerto Rico have received more than 2 feet of rain. President Joe Biden is urging support for a Senate bill that would shine the light on so-called dark money in federal elections. The Disclose Act would require organizations involved in campaign spending to disclose their donors. It would require super PACs and other campaign groups to report the source of any contribution totaling $10,000 or more. Protests have erupted across Iran after a 22-year-old woman died while being held by the morality police for violating the country's Islamic dress code. Videos of protests show women in the streets of Iran burning their headscarves. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.